welcome to the 2019 Mario and Alma Pastega Awards event. I'm so pleased to see all of you here together to celebrate our colleagues' accomplishments and recognition. As you all probably know, this is the highest award that we offer faculty at Western Oregon University. I was looking back through, how many award recipients do you think we've had for research? Any guesses? You quickly look in the brochure and calculate. This is the 40th. I think this is the 40th one. We used to call it the Faculty Honors Award. 6 years later, we developed the award for teaching. I believe the year after that, we developed the Staff Award, the Mario and Alma Pastega Staff Award. So today, we're going to honor both Dr. Scott Beaver and Dr. Rachel Harrington. They're going to each have some presentations to share with us.
So I'm very excited to be able to introduce Rachel Harrington, my friend and colleague. And I brought some notes because I could talk about Rachel for hours, and also because I promised Rachel that I wouldn't cry and that I wouldn't make her cry, because we really have a long history of crying together, actually. So, okay. So I think people think of academics as being people who are maybe specialized only in one thing or maybe not well-rounded. But Rachel Harrington is a very well-rounded person. I think of her kind of as a Renaissance woman. If you don't know Rachel very well, Rachel is not only an amazing teacher and researcher, but she loves the Pittsburgh Steelers. She will give you great canning recipes over the summer for how to make zucchini relish, and I think of her whenever I eat zucchini relish now. She grew up in a tiny town in southeastern Alaska, and she comes from a big family, and she worked in a cannery and has worked shift work and done all sorts of interesting things. And I think because of that, many of our students here at Western really, you can relate to them and they relate to you. And you know, you just bring a practical, common sense, no nonsense notion to so many things you do. And frankly, academia really needs that. So I love that about you. But at the same time, Rachel is one of the most talented teachers I've ever known, and I know a lot of teachers. She can take advanced concepts and make them accessible to students in really amazing ways. She leads graduate students through advanced research projects and thesis work, and she builds their identities as writers and researchers. Many of her students have published in professional journals and newsletters, and just the other day, she was running down the hall showing us a published article from one of her former students in Teaching Children Mathematics, which is like the journal, right, in mathematics education. And when I suggested to Rachel that that was part of the seeds that she had planted with this student, she refused to take any acceptance for that. But I know that teachers are inspired by Rachel to not only be math teachers, but to also be mathematicians and teacher researchers. Rachel's an amazing colleague, and many of her colleagues here in the division and outside of the division are here today. She's the type of friend and colleague who pays attention when people are having a bad day, and she suggests that you go get a coffee treat to make it better. She's always the first one to use fractions to make everything just a little bit better. Don't worry, Marie, we're 1/4 of the way through Ed TPA. We've almost graded 2/3 of the lit reviews. But she's also the first person to arrange meals for a colleague in need, or to go to bat with leadership for someone who deserves a fair shake, or to simply listen when people need good advice. She's also an excellent advisor and cheerleader for students. She'll sit and counsel a teacher candidate in crisis and listen to them so carefully and caringly. But she'll also give students a straight talk when they need to hear it. A few years ago, Rachel and I, right before we were going on sabbatical and had a little bit of senioritis ourselves, led a group of lively MATers who were finishing their action research project. Each week, Rachel and I would joke about who got to be good cop or bad cop to motivate these students to finish their projects. And Rachel can wear both hats well. She knows how to give that pep talk when students need it, but she also knows how to gently and firmly direct students back on the path. She's an amazing teacher. I know because I've co-taught with her probably a dozen times now. Every time I learn something new and I become a better teacher for working with her. She's creative, she's organized, she's well prepared, she's student-centered. She is beloved by her students, and I see a couple of her students here today, and for good reason. And it's not just the mathies, as I like to call them, who love Rachel. Rachel teaches our future elementary students, many of whom will come in and say, well, I don't think I'm very good at math, or I can't do math. And she will not allow that. She helps them to love math and to have a rich toolbox of amazing ways to make math meaningful and transformational to children. And she does this because she has a huge passion for math education and mathematical thinking, and she builds efficacy in future teachers. She's just a can-do person, and students leave her class with the how and why of math education. So like I said, she's about growth mindset. You are not allowed to tell Rachel that you're not good at math. She will not listen to that. It's not allowed. And she will humbly, but I also think a little bit proudly, share her own AP math test score with her future students to show that it's not where you start, it's where you end up, and that standardized assessments are not indicative of potential. Even as a mathie, she knows why children should never be assessed only through quantitative measures and argues strongly for why qualitative details matter. Her teaching and her research illustrate this. Learners are so much more than numbers in her classroom and in her research. She makes math fun, meaningful, and important to everyone who knows her, and certainly to our students. She wears fun math pun t-shirts, has geometry-themed toms, and she owns several P-I, inspired pie plates. Pi Day, March 14th, for those of you non-mathies out there, is a national holiday in Rachel's life and now in the College of Education. Students sing pie-themed carols, create pie-themed art, and of course, devour pie treats in her classes. Back to that Renaissance woman, she makes all of her pie crusts from scratch. It's like a family pride.
Thank you, Marie. I just wanted to start off today by first acknowledging my colleague, Scott Beaver. It's an honor to be speaking with him today. Scott and I actually have a lot in common. We were both from Alaska. We both lived in Pennsylvania for a while. We both studied math, and we both think Cheryl Beaver is awesome. So I've noticed that about us. I also want to acknowledge the Pastega family. I don't know if any one of them was able to make it today, but once a month I go to a support group at the Pastega Cancer Research Center in Corvallis. My mother-in-law hooked up her RV to the Pastega house for 3 weeks while her husband was in the hospital. My children go through the Pastega Christmas lights every year 4 or 5 times. And we have a Pastega room in our building. I consider it a great honor to be associated with this family, and I'm very, very proud of this award today. I also want to thank Marie. Marie is probably my closest friend here at Western over the years, and we've been through a lot together, a lot of tears. I was nervous about today's presentation, so I made the mistake of watching Marie's talk from last year. And when it got done, I told my husband, I do not want to do this now. I just watched Marie's and I feel way worse. And he said, well, what was her research on? And I said, it's about how children interact with storybooks and picture books. And my husband, the librarian, said, your research can't compete with that. Don't even, just do what you need to do. It'll be fine. Just don't try to compete. And so, Marie, I'm not going to try to compete today. I'm going to try to keep up a little bit. And again, finally, I want to mention my husband, Ryan. I have a lot of presentations and publications on my CV, and every one of those presentations is a weekend where he was left home alone with kids. I'm going to get emotional. And I appreciate all of his support in this process. I didn't identify him as the love of my life, though, on the biography like Scott did. That was my mistake. And finally, I want to thank the audience. Thank you for being here today. Signing up to listen to 2 talks about mathematics on a sunny Thursday afternoon is a big call, even given always the good snacks that we have. But I appreciate you being here. When people ask me what I do for a living, I often just say that I work in teacher preparation. I don't typically say that I'm a math educator, because I find that when I say I'm in math education, people want to tell me about all of the horrible experiences they've had over the years, and sometimes I just want to stand in the line at Winco and buy my groceries. So I fully acknowledge that there are some great mathies in the audience today, but there are also a lot of people who have some really bad experiences. And frankly, some trauma from their past related to mathematics. So when I was thinking about things to talk about today, I realized I have a little bit of imposter syndrome when it comes to my scholarship, and I struggled with what to talk about. But I also knew that this audience didn't really want to hear 30 minutes of me talking about how teachers engage with web-based curriculum in the classroom. And so I started thinking to myself, I'm going to have this room full of really interesting people, and they have to listen to me for 25 minutes. This is my chance to advance my agenda. And then I realized, no, that's kind of a negative perspective. I think you could ask my students, some of whom are here today, if you ever want to kill an hour in Rachel's class, ask her about one of those 4 topics, and she'll just go off. But I decided instead to try to have a more positive focus today, and I asked myself, okay, what's at my core? What do I fundamentally believe about math education, and what can I share with people today? And I believe fundamentally that children should be thinking in math class, and that thinking happens when they solve problems. And I'm sure when you look at that, you might think, well, that's not very groundbreaking. Isn't that what we do in math class? We spend a lot of time thinking and solving problems. But I would argue against that. I think a lot of us, our experiences, we didn't get to do a lot of thinking in math class. We were asked to remember and repeat what our teachers had done, and we weren't actually pushed to do a lot of thinking on our own. And I would say that we didn't spend enough time solving problems, and instead we spent too much time working on exercises and doing tasks that did not involve complex problem solving. I want children to be thinking in math class, and so today that's what I'm going to try to share with you, is a little bit about my philosophy on what thinking looks like, and also what I feel problem solving looks like. So this is my feeble attempt to make my presentation as interesting as Marie's. I'm going to sprinkle in some of my favorite quotes that are related to my talk. These are some quotes that have carried me through as a math educator. And I also thought that, if I was going to make my presentation more engaging, I should just, what better way to do that than include some cute pictures of my kids. But I will tell you, it's not just cute pictures of my kids. So each one of these pictures is somehow related to something that I'm about to tell you afterwards. And so that's my little puzzle within the presentation. See if you can figure it out. All right, so let's talk first about what it means to do a math problem, or what a math problem really is. Stein and Smith talk about the things that we do in math class and as falling into 4 different levels. And they talk about how we ask children to do things that are just purely memorization. And those would be things like, do you know the definition of a triangle? Can you do your multiplication facts? What are some things that you have memorized that you can just repeat without thinking? They also talk about us asking children to do a lot of procedures without connections. And so those are tasks that we give kids that are not connected in any way to a picture or to a context or to language. They're just math exercises or procedures that we carry out. We start looking, when we cross the dotted line, into more high cognitive demand tasks when we ask children to carry out procedures that are connected to something. So we ask them to carry out a procedure that's somehow connected to, let's say, a graph. So maybe I give children 2 equations and I say, okay, I want to find the solution to this system of 2 equations. Show me how it appears on the graph. What does that look like when I graph it? And connecting those 2 representations together would be an example of a procedure with connection. Where we really want children going, though, what our goal should be in math class is to have them do what Stein and Smith called doing mathematics. We want them to actually do mathematics. And the way they define mathematics and doing mathematics are ill-structured tasks, tasks that don't have a clearly defined path on how to solve them, or tasks that we engage in our everyday lives. What is math that we see every day as human beings? I sometimes talk about math real world and real world math. And math real world would be those kind of word problems that you always found at the end of the exercises in your math textbook. They're sort of poorly constructed contexts that we try to do as math people to make ourselves feel better, like it somehow applies. But doing mathematics is more than that. That is the math you do as you engage in just everyday life. And an example of that might be my family and I are going to take a trip to the Enchanted Forest, and we have $150 to spend. Is that enough? That's a poorly constructed task. It's ill-constructed. I don't know the solution to that. You haven't given me enough information. How much does it cost to get in? Am I going to buy a bracelet? Am I going to buy tickets? Am I going to pack a lunch? Am I going to buy a lunch? There's lots of more information I need to know the solution. And there really is no right answer. Maybe $150 is enough for one family, but not for another. And so that would be an example of something that is doing mathematics. The National Council of Teachers of Mathematics have helped us to understand that what's happening on the right side of the line is what we call conceptual understanding. And what's happening on the left side of the line is procedural fluency. And it's not that left is bad, right is good. It's that we need balance in our classrooms. And so much of our experiences in math class has been on the left side of the line. And we need to give kids more experiences on the right. The analogy I give my students in methods is I say to them, when you sign up to be on the basketball team, you usually have obligations where you have to attend practice and you also get to go to games and play in games. And what I see is what's happening on the right side of the line is playing the game of mathematics. What's happening on the left side of the line are the drills and the activities that happen in practice that help me get better at playing the game. But the reality is we often tell children, you're not ready to play the game. You're just need to keep practicing. You need to keep going to practices. And I say to them, what if you signed up for basketball and your coach said you will never get to play in a game? You need to come to practice every day and you need to do all the drills, but you will never get to play in the game. You would quit basketball. All the fun is when you play the game. And I argue that we aren't giving children enough time there on the right playing the game. So in this next part, I really want to dig into what I think mathematics problems really are. So some examples of what those look like and share with you some of my favorites. So back in 1998, my college methods professor at Western Washington University came to me and a handful of colleagues and said, I want you to work on a project. And I didn't know it at the time, but that was my first example of scholarship. That was my first dive into scholarship. Basically what we did is we went to his house and we opened up a file cabinet that was jammed tight with problems he had collected over the years. And he said, organize these so teachers can use them. And that's what we did. And don't you love my fabulous Microsoft Word clip art that was on the cover circa 1998? It's called You Thought You Had Problems. And what we basically did is collected all of these really unique and interesting problems and organized them for teachers. And I still use these problems today. I have it, fortunately, it's not in a 3-ring binder anymore, and I have lost the 2 floppy disks that came with it, but it is safely scanned and now stored on the Google Drive. So this is the first task that I sometimes share with my students in my elementary, middle, and middle-high methods class. It's called Adding the Square. And the context of the task is that A plus B is 17, C plus D is 18. So all of the sums of those letters that the arrow goes through, it tells you what the sum is. And what I ask students to do in my class is tell me what's the value of A, B, C, and D. And they set to work on it. What I love about this task is that my middle-high methods students will immediately set up a system of equations. And they'll say, okay, I know A plus B is 17, C plus D is 18, A plus C is 12, and they'll do some substitution and elimination, and they'll get the answer. My elementary middle students will look at that and say, well, if A plus B is 17 and C plus D is 18, then I know all 4 of them together are probably 35. Chances are slim that the answer of any of those is negative, so we'll just go with that. And they pull out 35 blocks, unifix cubes or unit cubes, and they start moving them around until they fall into 4 piles. And this problem, I love this problem because it's an excellent opportunity for us to look at different solution strategies and talk about their benefits and drawbacks and compare how they're similar and different. And the other thing that I like about it is it's what's called a low floor, high ceiling task. So it's low floor. For example, I could give this problem to Seamus. I could tell him, Seamus, here's 35 blocks and I want you to put them into 4 containers so that this is true. And he could do it. Or I could open it up to the class who maybe has had some algebra and they could solve it in a different way. The exciting thing is it's not just low floor. It's not just a task that anyone can enter. It's got some really interesting things that we can talk about. It's got a high ceiling. We can go really far with it. For example, do I really need to know all 6 of those sums? How many do I need to know? Would 2 be enough? Would 4 be enough? what would happen if something was negative? We made this assumption that all the values were positive. Would any of these solution strategies that we figured out work if the values were negative? How would that look different in our representations? There's lots of interesting conversations we can have about this task. It has a high ceiling. Another example of a low floor, high ceiling task that I enjoy doing with students is called cutting the cube. It says all the faces of the cube are painted. It's then cut into 27 equal sized cubes. How many painted faces does each small cube have? What if you cut it into 64, so a 4 by 4 by 4, or what if you cut it into an n by n by n? How many faces would they each have? And again, low floor. I brought my Rubik's Cube in here for Seamus today because I imagine that Chrissy and Eva, I could give you a Rubik's Cube and you could make a table and you could plot the different values and you could investigate the patterns that are happening with the different faces. And these are first graders, third graders, fourth graders that can engage in an interesting way with this problem. However, I imagine some of you in this room, if I gave you a pile of blocks, could build a 4 by 4 by 4 model and start to look at some things. And maybe some of you could even predict what a 5 by 5 by 5 would. And some of you might even be able to generalize to the n by n by n. So this is an exciting problem because it is a low floor. These folks, everyone up here in these front few tables can engage with this task in a different way, but we can have some really interesting conversations about the algebra that's underneath it. The final one is, I throw in here because I joke sometimes that my true dream career profession was always to be a mathematician for a professional baseball team. And I love this problem. It says our Major League Baseball strike zone is a rectangle approximately 15 inches by 40 inches. What effect is there on the size of the strike zone if the umpire adds just 2 inches to all sides? Again, this is a really interesting problem because it's poorly worded. What is the effect? So what am I trying to figure out here? Is this an area problem? Is this a percent problem? Would a quadratic equation help me here? Would a graph? Like, what is this? I don't know what this is. And that's what I love about this problem, is it doesn't matter. It's got a low floor. There's students who even just have a basic understanding of the area of a rectangle can engage with this task. But I was talking with Scott about this task, and he was telling me how now we have this new video technology that allows us to make strike zones three-dimensional. And so I could even take this in those kinds of conversations once kids get an answer they're comfortable with here. The other thing I'll tell you, you want to go down a rabbit hole, do a Google image search for strike zone. I was trying to find a cool picture to put up here, and the mathematics that came up on my screen was fascinating. I would love to go and just look at that. So anyway, I want to transition now to talking more specifically about kind of my own research and some of the work that I've been doing over the last few years. And in 2018, I co-authored a book called How Students Think When Doing Algebra. And our goal with that was to synthesize all the research that's been done on teaching and learning algebra over the last 40, 50 years. We looked at around 800 research articles. And I didn't look at 800, I looked at a small slice of them. But our goal was to focus on how can we put the thinking back into algebra. Algebra is typically a subject that it's easy to kind of reduce to procedures and just remembering and repeating the things that your teacher taught you. So before we get into the research, I want to flash you back to how algebra looks to first graders. This is algebra in first grade. We give these kinds of problems to first graders. We ask them, okay, there's an empty box there, and I'm going to subtract 15, and it equals 5. What do you think should go inside that box? And children are able to engage with this task. They might look at it and say to themselves, well, you know, like 15 I can count on, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Or maybe they put a pile of blocks together and they have 15 and they figure out how many would be left if they took away the 5. And there's lots of different ways first graders engage with this task. And eventually, you know, most first graders, second graders can tell you that 20 minus 15 is what goes inside that box, that little box. The problem is, though, we get to high school algebra and that box becomes an X. And we ask children this problem. We say, well, X minus 15 is 5. What do you think X might be? And they say, well, you know, I'm thinking about it, and I think I can just look at that, and I know X is 20. And we go, no, we don't just think about it. You have to show me your work. I want to see a plus 15 and a plus 15, and I want you to draw the line, and I want you to carry down. No thinking. Please show your work. And I did it. I'm guilty of it. I did it all the time. And the reason that we do it is, this is the argument is, well, they're not always going to be that easy, right? So we're going to get problems that are more complicated, Rachel, and when you get to those, you need to know the procedure, so I want you to start now. Don't do any thinking. So now I want to get back to the research that we had done. I stumbled across this article that was published in 1983 by Kukuman, and it really changed my trajectory on how I think about algebra. And what the task says is solve for x without using a pencil. So you can use a pencil to keep track, but basically what it's saying is don't use those formal procedures. And so I want you to do that right now with me. Let's think about this. What Kukuman says is, don't worry about adding 15 to both sides or undoing what's been done to x or all the procedures that we've taught. What he says is, look at this task and ask children to cover up what's messy. Cover up what's ugly and hard to understand. And so what children will do is they will cover up that piece, right? That's messy and hard to understand. But hey, now I've got that problem that I had back in first grade, right? So now I know what's under the box. 20. So whatever was under the box, that's 20. Okay, so where do I go from here? Cover up what's messy. Cover up what's ugly and hard to understand. So I'm going to cover up the top. I'm just not going to think about it for now. So now whatever is hard to understand divided by 2 is 20. So what's under my box? And now I've got 5 times something is 40. That feels like maybe a second or third grade problem, right? I can figure that out, and I know that's 8. The reality is almost every algebra problem in a high school Algebra 1 textbook can be solved this way. They're constructed that way. And these are some examples. For example, because you might say, well, that works for that kind, but let me give you some more examples. For example, let's look at this first one. Cover up what's messy. I don't know what's going on with that divide by x plus 9. That's making me stressed. I can't remember how to undo that, so I'm just going to cover it up. So 10 divided by something is 1. What's under the box? 10. 10 divided by 10 is 1. So now I can think about that. X plus 9 is 10. X must be 1. Okay. Let's look at the second one. High school Algebra 1 teacher Rachel would have said, distribute the 1/2, undo the parentheses, everyone, and then let's subtract 3/2 and blah, 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 blah. No. Instead, what I'm going to say is cover up what's messy. Half of something is 6. So what's that something? 12. So whatever's under the parentheses is 12. X must be 9. This last one I love because I would have told my students to, distribute the 3's, combine like terms, get your x's onto one side, do all those things. Cover up what's messy. And since I understand about the equal sign, I can cover up things on both sides of the equation. I'm covering up equal things, and what's left behind? X equals -1. I don't even need to distribute. And I would argue that in each of these cases, I'm thinking through the procedure. I'm not carrying out a procedure. I'm not remembering and repeating. Instead, I'm thinking. But I will tell you that this makes a lot of folks very uncomfortable. A lot of Algebra 1 teachers very uncomfortable. We have pushed kids in the past so much to just remember and repeat. So as I go through my work, I have had to ask myself, how do I get my pre-service teachers to move away from this idea that math teaching is remembering and repeating, and how do I get them to move towards thinking in mathematics? So I give them problems like this, and you might say, well, that's not a problem, that's an exercise, and I would agree, 198 times 25, but I don't give it to them that way. I start this way. I ask them, think about what is 200 times 5? Anybody know? What do you think, Eva? 1,000. All right, let's see if Eva can do this one. You want to try it, Eva? Seamus will back you up. If I know 200 times 5 is 1,000, what would 200 times 20 be? It takes some thinking. What do you think? You think you know, Chrissy? You got an excited face on your... What do you think, Seamus? 4,000? How'd you know that? Okay, so it's 4,000. So 2,000, Chrissy's problem was 1,000, and the next one was 4,000. What would 200 times 25 be? If I know the first one's 1,000 and the second one's 4,000. Any ideas? Because we know the first one, we've got 5 200s, and we've got 20 200s, and now we've got 25 200s. So now my question for the audience is, if I know that 200 times 25 is, what's 198 times 25? It's 2 25s less, right? So 4,950. The thing is, if I had given you this problem and just said, hey, can you figure out what 198 times 25 is? I bet most of you, including myself, would have set it up like we did on the right-hand side. But what I challenge students to do is to engage with thinking about how we can create multiplication strings, addition strings, these are called strings, that allow children to logically think about what the mathematics is. Because honestly, when a child encounters 198 times 25, I don't want them doing it that way. I don't want them doing it the way on the right. I want them to think through it and reason, oh, that's 225s less than 225s. I can figure that out. And the reason I want them to do that is if they forget the procedure or they maybe carry out the procedure incorrectly, if they know how to do what's happening on the left, they have strategies for going back and figuring out if they're correct. Or they have the ability, look at all of you, some of whom think you are not good at math, that just figured out what 198 times 25 was in your head. And you wouldn't have been able to do that if you hadn't been thinking through this reasonably. Okay, I'm about to wrap up. I think I've been going too long. And I hesitate to end my presentation with a wall of text because I know PowerPoint rules tell me not to do that. But I am very, very proud of this wall of text. These are 5 articles that have been published by my elementary math instructional leader candidates or graduates, now elementary math specialist graduates. And Cheryl and Lori and I have worked really hard with these students to help them engage in thinking about what problem solving means and what thinking means. And these are 5, I'm probably more proud of this scholarship than I am of any of the other things that I've done. And each one of these articles represents an article that they have written that somehow deals with problem solving and somehow deals with putting the thinking back into mathematics. And I'm very, very proud of that. I'm ending my slide with a title slide because this was my alternate title. I was trying to decide what my title should be for this session. I think it's really important that we all acknowledge this, that you actually are good at math. Once you can know that math is about thinking and not remembering and repeating, once you know that math is about problem solving and not working on exercises, once you know that, I think we can help people recover from the trauma that they've experienced and help them undo this notion that they are either math people or not math people. And then I think we can all be confident that everyone, including you, is good at math. Thank you.
So good afternoon. My name is Habib Bemard. I'm serving as the chair of the Natural Science and Mathematics Division, but I'm also faculty in the mathematics department. And so it's my pleasure really to introduce Dr. Scott Beaver, this year's recipient of the Pastega Award for Excellence in Teaching. So Scott joined us in 2005, I believe. So we got lucky, you know, I cannot really say we bought one, we got one for free, but we got really lucky with a couple that we got here. And Scott's been really, from the moment that joined our department, hit the ground and running, been active in all parts of the department and the university. All of you know this. And Scott been teaching all of the levels of mathematics that we had. I don't know if there are any courses that you haven't really taught. Oh, maybe abstract algebra. Maybe abstract algebra and group theory. These are the two. So those are Cheryl teaching them. So, so between the two of them, we really don't need anybody else. Sorry, Lori. So, and Scott also been teaching some of our pre-service and in-service classes, but mainly teaching our major, math major students that are there. And Scott is really passionate about teaching, and this is a confession I have to make. So Scott is never happy with any of the textbook that we have. And at the very beginning, it kind of annoyed me. So, oh my gosh, this guy is never happy with any book. But then once I got to know him, I realized that the way that he is thinking that the math should be taught, it's not in those books. And that's the reason that he is not happy with the books that we have. And this really shows in his teaching method that he really doesn't have a lecture class. It's mostly taught by doing activities. Some of the hardest courses, at least I think Scott and I believe that some of the hardest courses that we have in mathematics department is advanced calculus. And I believe the two of us are the only one who's teaching that. And so Scott teaches it for 5-6 years, and I say, Scott, I think I'm ready to teach. And then I teach it for 1 year and say, okay, I think I'm done. You can pick it up again. And it's a very abstract 2-semester course, 2-term courses. And these are very difficult because it's so abstract, and you have to solve these problems that are all proofs. And so besides being colleagues, we are also neighbors. Our offices are next to each other. And the department being so small, you really hear everything in each other's offices, what's happening with the students. So this is how it goes in Scott's office hours. So first term, that's 311, advanced calculus 1. Student come, knock the door. Dr. Beaver, you have time? Can I ask you a question? And Scott say, oh yeah, come on in. And I say, I just don't know how to do this problem. And then Scott says, okay, let's do an example. And then they start working on the board. And so this goes on, and as term progresses, you will see these students come in with a lot more confidence. And a big part of it is because when they come with an idea on how to solve a problem, Scott doesn't say, well, that's good. He says, oh, that's a great idea. I didn't think about it this way. It gives students wings. They really feel like they're going to fly. And that's how, and another part of it is that they never feel that Scott is at least thinking that he's above them. He thinks they are equal. And that gives such a confidence to students that they can do whatever that Scott is giving them to do. And I'm really proud to introduce my colleague, Dr. Scott Beaver, without further ado.
Thank you, Hamid. I would also like to thank the Pastega Awards Committee for both of their selections today. It is an honor to share the stage with Rachel today. I'd like to thank my family, Dr. Cheryl Beaver and future doctors Elizabeth Beaver and Dr. Evan Beaver, for the support that they've given me, not just for the past several weeks and months, but for an awful long time, and I really appreciate that. I'd also like to thank Hamid again for nominating me and writing a letter of support on my behalf. And in that vein, I'd also like to thank Dr. Lori Burton and Dr. Brian Dutton for writing me letters. A couple of former students have written letters for me as well, and I'd like to call them by name. Erica Stuckert, who's in attendance today. Thank you for coming, Eric. Appreciate that. Brittany Johnson as well, Jose Sosa Vasquez, and at the time she wrote the letter, it was Ariel Setnicker, and now it's Dr. Ariel Setnicker, so that's pretty cool. I'm awful proud of that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my pedagogy today, and I think that's relevant, but I'd like to warm us up with a math problem, because you know what you got into when you decided to come here today. So if you know about the Monty Hall problem and you've already thought carefully through the solution, please don't chime in too early here. So it goes as follows. Monty Hall was a game show host in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and in particular he was the host for a show called Let's Make a Deal. And in this particular problem that a reader for Marilyn Vos Savant's column wrote into Marilyn about, and Marilyn answered it correctly and was just lit up by a bunch of people who later had to apologize and admit they were completely wrong about it. But so the problem goes as follows. There are 3 doors. They're obscuring contents. There's a car behind one of the doors, and in my version there are 2 donkeys. Because of the graphic on the next page, it has it. So there are 2 donkeys, and we'll assume that you don't want the donkeys and that you do want the car just for concreteness. Pick the right door. Monty asks you to pick a door. If you pick the right one, you get to keep the car. And I suppose as an added incentive, if you pick the wrong one, you get to keep the donkey, right? So, all right, so 1 out of 3, right? Okay, here's the wrinkle. the donkey behind door 1, you pick door 2, all right? Now the donkey behind one of the other 2 doors, in this case door 1, tries to get out and reveals himself. So now Monty asks you if you want to switch your guess. Take a couple of minutes, argue with the people at your table, and again, don't reveal it if you already know how this works, but yeah, hammer it out, think about it. Should you switch your guess? There are 3 answers, right? You should, you shouldn't, or it doesn't matter. Decide. So why don't we just do a show of hands, just out of curiosity. Now, remember, there are 3 possible, and you got to pick one of them, all right? There's no not voting stuff, so you got to pick one. Either it doesn't matter, or you should definitely not switch, or you should definitely switch. So for definitely not switch, how many hands? Who says yeah? All right, we got a couple. All right, very good. Doesn't matter. Raise your hand. Quite a few more. Now maybe we got half between those 2 answers, and then you should definitely switch. Okay. You know, it's remarkable whether it's an audience of non-mathematicians or if it's a class in Math 243 or even Math 311, it really does kind of split down the middle. It's consistent. I've been talking about this in class for maybe 20 years off and on when I get to teach a statistics class or something, or a probability class, and it really does split right down the middle. Do you want to know the answer? Yes. You do want to know the answer? Okay. You should definitely switch. It turns out there's a probability of 2/3 that you will pick the right door if you're interested in the car if you switch your guess, and only 1/3 if you don't switch your guess. So that means it's twice as likely for you to succeed if you switch your guess. Now, to explain that would take us a little farther afield than I want to go, except to say that if you wrote out, okay, let's put the car in door 1 and list out all the possible ways that could go, put the car in door 2, list out all the ways that could go, and so on, you would notice that 2 out of 3 of those, if you switch, you land on the car. So it's easy to write all those outcomes out and everything, but I won't bore you about doing that. Now, that explanation probably only convinced about half of you that raised your hand that said it didn't matter. So what I often do then is, well, let's simulate it, right? If we can simulate it properly using index cards or something, and we can sort of, you know, try this and do it over and over and over, after some reasonable number of trials, we're going to get pretty close to 2/3 as our chances of victory. And that convinces everybody, because we can do, you know, 300, 400 simulations in a class. And if the real probability is a half that you'll get the car, it's not going to be that far away. You end up finding out pretty quickly that it is, in fact, more advantageous to switch your guess. So warm-up's over. Now we're going to dive into just a few just sort of principles I have that I try to engage in when I'm teaching math here at WU. As Hamid said, I do respect students as equals, essentially. They certainly don't know as much math as I do. There's no point in saying that, you know, that's my job, right? But they're people just like me, and their time is just as important as mine is. So, you know, I treat them that way, and that to me is important. I want to make them comfortable. The other thing we have going on in math is we have a big language barrier as we go through math, right? It has its own nouns, its own verbs, its own adjectives. It's part of the English language or German or whatever you're studying, but it's a big barrier. And then we get to the symbols, right? The mathematical symbols, which were a huge advance in the way that people talked about mathematics, but it came at a cost. Prior to, you know, maybe 1650 or so, mathematics was typically written out in words, and it was clear, but it was not short. And now, when we have our nice notation to work with, what we have is a paragraph's worth of information crammed into maybe half a line or less, right? So that is an improvement. It allows us to more efficiently talk about math, but it also allows us to blast through a lot of math kind of quickly. If we're going through a paragraph's worth of concepts in just a second or two of notation, students can suffer from that. So it's part of my job to make sure that that barrier is breached as much and as soon as possible. Obviously, we want students to build their skills. There is that left hand of the diagram that Dr. Harrington was talking about. I also want them to have a nice view from 30,000 feet when the opportunity presents itself. If there's concepts in Math 254 that are very parallel to concepts in Math 341, I want students in Math 341 to know that. I want them to be able to come back and relook at the things that they did in Math 254, which have parallels in Math 341, for example. I mean, math is not fun if you are not reasonably confident. So it's important to me that students have repeated triumphs as they go forward. They can't just struggle and not get anything out of it. So that's a big deal. They have to build their confidence that way. And finally, as I put that equation up there one slide too early and you've all been staring at it, I'll explain it now. It's one of the most beautiful, I think it is the most beautiful equation in math. It has the 5 most important constants in the whole alphabet of math, right? So you've got the additive identity 0, the multiplicative identity 1, and then you have these other things, right? There's a pi, we all recognize pi, that's the ratio of the circumference to a diameter of every circle. The base for the natural logarithm, that's a little more obscure, it's e. It has a value of about 2.78, it's irrational. And then there's a number that's not even real in there, that's I, that's the square root of -1, and so that's not a real number, but it is a number, and it is an awesome number, and it's incredibly useful in math. And there they are, all 5 of them in one place. Anybody knows where to get a bumper sticker of that? I would love it. I want to challenge students, but again, I want them to be able to succeed. So I set high bars for them, and then I essentially ask them to get there, but I don't set it so high that the struggle is not productive. That's a big deal. And then finally, once I give them enough to go with, I get out of the way. I don't want to keep talking. Oh, you know, I could show them an example, and I could show them a more complicated example. That's not really useful. They can do the more complicated example with just a little nudge in their seat. So they don't need me to show them how to do 4 of them before they start their homework. So I used to lecture. I love to lecture. I'm so smart. I write all this great stuff up on the board, and it's beautiful and it's flowing, and it just takes up students' time more than I would have liked to admit in 2005 or 6 or 7. So now I may lecture, but it's probably only for 10 or 15 minutes at the beginning of class at most, if at all possible. My favorite quote, I mean, there are origins to this. I don't think anybody agrees on them, but I think it's true of most people. If you're doing something, you're getting a lot better training than just listening about it. I think Rachel would agree with me on that one based on her talk as well. So that leads me to sort of a piece of the title of the talk today is positioning the material. And this is an abstract notion of, you know, more or less how far away do I put the material from students. And so they are sufficiently challenged, but not challenged too much. If we put it too close, if we make it a little too easy for them, then they blast through it. They don't learn much. Everybody gets an A, and nobody takes anything away from it, really. They learn too little. So put a little too far away, like maybe I did in the first couple of years of advanced calculus, then it's demoralizing for students, and that's no good either. I mean, the best students may get through it, but why put everybody else through that as well? So productive struggle. It's got to be a struggle for students to esteem the material sufficiently. Man, it has to be productive or it just sinks. The idea is to provide continual and frequent, reliable moments of discovery so that students can build a very positive math self-image and carry that forward. So let's do another one of those discoveries. We did the Monty Hall problem. Let's do another one. Now, I love baseball, so I managed to shoehorn a baseball reference into my talk here. For those of you who are not familiar with the batting average, it's the number of hits over the number of at-bats. So a player goes up to the plate, and if they have an at-bat, they either get a hit or they don't. And so we can look at the proportion of hits they got, basically. All right? Expressed to 3 decimal places, and we don't pronounce the decimal place when we say it. So for example, last year, right fielder Mookie Betts of the Red Sox led the majors in batting average with 180 hits, 520 at-bats. Divide those, and you get 346 to the 3rd decimal place. Notice I didn't pronounce the decimal. Okay, so that's batting average, how we calculate it. So here's the puzzler. Suppose Bryce bats 300, good batting average, first half of the year. Second half of the year, bats 400. That's a great batting average. That's not going to happen over a whole year again, I think. We'll see. All right, now suppose Reese bats a little less than Bryce, 280 in the first half. And again, really well, but a little less than Bryce in the second half, 380. Take a minute, see if you can parse this out. Think about it. Is it possible, reasonable? Chat about it. We'll come back in a minute. Is it possible? What do you think? Yes or no? Raise your hand if you think yes. That's good. You guys are smart. This is awesome. Yes, I'm glad you raised your hand, Cheryl. Okay, so here's a nice example of how it can happen. Take a look at the numbers for a minute and see where we land. Bryce, 90 out of 300 in the first half of the season. Do that division, you get 300 as the average. 40 out of 100 in the second half. That's a 400 batting average. Reese, on the other hand, 28 out of 100. And 114 out of 300 to get to his 380. But when we add the hits for Reese, we get 142. When we add the hits for Bryce, we get 130. Both of them had the same number of at-bats. So there we go. How did this happen, right? The average is lower in the beginning, lower in the end, but when we aggregate it together, it's higher. That's crazy. Well, the mystery comes from, or the solution to the mystery arises as a result of noticing that Reese's higher average has a big weight attached to it. There's 300 at-bats that go along with that 380. And that tends to pull his average up farther. And Bryce's biggest number of at-bats go with the lower average down there at 300. So in the end, that's what happens. This is an example of Simpson's paradox, which occurs when a trend shows up within groups of data, but when you aggregate and get rid of the group structure of it, then the trend either vanishes or even worse, reverses. And you don't have to look too far in things like this, the sports stuff, to find these things. Okay, so back to a little pedagogical stuff. So yeah, in 2005 I came here and I lectured quite a bit that first year. But I noticed some things were going on in some of the classes that were really making me wonder whether lecture is the right thing. And the reason I noticed those is partly because of the content itself. It's reasonable to think that the course content may help us figure out how to teach certain classes. And this is no exception. These two particular classes for me each gave me a different kind of epiphany about how I ought to teach in most circumstances. So let me talk briefly about both of those, and then I'll leave you with another puzzler. In sequences and series, this is Calculus 3, and I'm not going to show you any sequences or series. These are, they're great mathematical objects and everything, but I have been persuaded by several folks to leave that stuff out, and I think they were right. Calculus 1, Calculus 2, and Calculus 4 and 5, which we don't offer here at Western, but 1, 2, and 4, they're very algorithmic problems. Those are problems where you're doing some sort of calculation. You're finding an area under the curve, or finding the slope of some curve at a point, or maybe some pressure, some physics stuff involved in it. Those are algorithmic. Those are, you're going to end up crunching some numbers, doing a procedure, and coming up with a numerical or perhaps an answer that's a function at the end. That is not what is going on in sequences and series. Sequences and series is a class in which the students have to draw conclusions about some property of the sequence or the series, right? Does it converge, whatever that means, or diverge, the opposite of whatever the first thing meant. Those are not calculation problems. Those are not algorithmic. Those are things where you have to apply reasoning, and it's not just show your work. Your work is the work. That's the whole point of the problem, is to try to make some argument. And unfortunately, at every university, there's not a proof training class that comes before Calculus 3. So if we're going to adhere to the way this material is constructed and help teach students proofs, we have two choices. You can either put an introduction to proofs course in front of it as a prerequisite to help train them for the logical work they're going to need to do in that class, or you can train them in the class, right? And so as the curriculum process goes here, it just didn't seem right to put a 280 in front of a 253, so I instead decided that I would help train the students in that at the time. And so it's still problem solving. It's just a really different kind of problem. You're not solving a problem looking for a numerical or a function answer. Your product is an argument. And that's a different deal. And students are not, they don't see that very often. In geometry in high school, they had line proofs, right? You may have seen a few of those, but that's it. These aren't line proofs either. So, yeah, Tamid talked about this. So I stand by that statement. So I went ahead and first I published a short paper about how this would work. And then I took that paper and I got rid of all the words and started adding, more and more theorems and definitions to it. And in the end, after about 4 years, it had turned into a textbook that I think works very well. It does focus on some elementary logic in it, and then it focuses on the rigor of arguments, since they are at the center of the material. Another thing that I put in this book that I think is really important is I put more stuff than is really necessary to make the arguments. And what that means is that students that take this course with that text, they have an opportunity for multiple different paths to a solution, and that's a big deal, right? That allows them to use their right brains and be a little creative. So I'm particularly proud of that notion. And I love to hear students argue about which of the methods is better when they're working on worksheets in class. That makes me happy. So, and in particular, this sets us up for first-year students getting practice at proving theorems, making these arguments earlier than they otherwise would. And that's a big deal for anybody who's taught an upper division class. Theorem proving skills do not come easily. They take experience and practice, and the earlier we start on that, the better. And so we can get this happening for freshmen. I think it's a big deal. Now we move to advanced calculus. Now, this is a completely different type of thing. I lectured, as I mentioned, in 2005. I had a terrific textbook, Elementary Analysis, The Theory of Calculus by Ken Ross at the University of Oregon. It's really well written. It's a terrific textbook. And so I took the stuff from that, I put it up on the board, I made these beautiful presentations for students, and then they would go off and dutifully do their homework, and they would return it to me, and it bore all the hallmarks of just praying to the gods of partial credit. And they just weren't getting there. And so I doubled down, right? I worked harder on my lectures, and I tried to make them smarter and show the students more, and nothing else happened. It was exactly the same. And so by the end of the third year, I realized that something else had to happen in this course. So what I did, I decided to try to use the Moore method. The Moore method was a method of teaching, and I use that term loosely, invented by or discovered. No one knows which it is, right? It's a math thing, so it's invented or discovered. I don't know what it is. But R.L. Moore of the University of Texas at Austin has produced more PhD mathematicians as his advisees than anyone still to this day, by a factor of a lot. So it works really well to produce PhD mathematicians, but after a couple of years it became clear that it didn't work really that well for helping undergraduate students get to the end of advanced calculus. So I modified it, right? So the idea then is I took this long list of theorems that I used in the Moore method, and I tweaked it into a list of definitions, theorems, axioms, and all that, so that some of them are homework problems and some of them are ones that students have to present in front of the class without notes and get critiqued. That is a big step. That's a big step. Students are terrified, frankly, before that first one. And then they get up there and they know they're in front of friends, and they see that we critique them gently. Everybody's professional. There's a sort of set of rules that we apply in that class to make sure nobody takes it on the chin too hard. That's most of the time. By the time they get to advanced calculus, they've done enough work that they can handle this material. They're just not sure of that in the first week or two. Maybe 3 or 4, it depends on the students and the material. So, but they present up in front of the class, and that's about half their grade, is those 6 or 7 presentations. It's non-trivial, but it is, in some sense, a trial by fire, and eventually it works. For every single student I've had in those classes, it gets you there. It's just an incredible struggle for them, and it's such a struggle. When they have to go think deeply about a problem for several days, maybe weeks, this is what happens. right? You got to school, you don't remember how you got there because you were thinking how to prove some function is uniformly continuous. Or you know, they wake up with ideas in the middle of the night, and that's when I know I got them. That's when they're being mathematicians. So that's a terrific thing, I think. And they are wiped. They don't want to see me again until they come back to the next alumni picnic, and that's fair. But when they do come back, most of them thank me for putting them through that. That always makes me feel good, and I do appreciate that. So that's the pedagogical stuff. Let's dive into one more puzzler, all right? Now, again, if you've seen this one, don't blurt it out right away, but how can this happen? All the same components, I guess we could call them, are in triangles A and B. You got the two little Tetris pieces, right? 2 and 5 for the yellow and 3 and 5 for the, is it 5? Yeah, 3 and 5 for the green. And you have the the red and the blue triangles. How do you rearrange them and lose a square? Take a minute or two. Take a careful look at the blue and the red triangle. Now, if they fit perfectly into the big triangle, they have to have the same rise over run. They have to have the same, you know, length and height, right? So if we look at triangle A, I'm going to look at it over here because it's not that wide like I'm looking at it there. What do we have? We have 5 in the base of the blue in triangle A, and then 2, right? So that slope is then, I guess, 2/5 rise over run. So the ratio of the height of the triangle to the base is 2/5. But look at the red one. What is that, 3/8? You got 3 vertical and 8 horizontal. So those don't have the same slope. So what you are seeing there is 2 not triangles. If you look carefully, the triangle A has a little cusp in it, just barely, and the triangle B has a little bump in it on the hypotenuse. So, yeah, careful examination will always get you this. Now, if you did this with triangles that are over thousands of grid things, it would, you know, it's harder. But the small ones we can parse out if we pay careful enough attention. Okay, again, thank you for listening today. I appreciate it. And, yeah.
What's obvious is I need a lot more coffee this time of day to do these puzzlers, but it's really enjoyable to be a student in the classroom, and that's what we saw this afternoon. It's also a great time of the year to celebrate this award year after year after year. Beautiful spring day as well, and also on sort of a launch pad for next week with our Academic Excellence Showcase, and it's an example of what makes Western so special. I also want to, before I bring Scott and Rachel up, I mean, Rachel talked about Cheryl, so that's got to, but I'd like to ask those committee members who are here to stand and be recognized for the selection process. So if you'll be recognized for that work, thank you. And stay standing, and I know we have a number of other previous award winners in the room, and I'd like those individuals to stand and join the previous selection committee, because it's yeah, this is the legacy. Thank you. Yeah, Rob talked about going back 40 years. This is the legacy upon which the DNA of Western is so proud, and makes it so special to be here and celebrate teaching and scholarship together. And I think that's what is part of our mission, which makes us distinctive in so many different ways. And so I learned a number of new terms. Mathies, I haven't heard that in a while, so that was great. I love that. And then Pi Day I knew about, but who doesn't like pie any time of the year? But one puzzle within a puzzle, and I'll ask Rachel and Scott to come forward, is in Rachel's presentation, there was a little indicator of what was in her bio and also in the introduction. And that was in the first photograph of her family. You may have noticed or not noticed that she was wearing a Steelers t-shirt. Yeah. And so that was evidence that was true. And so the question for Scott is, which baseball team is your favorite? You probably Phillies. Okay, good. And that was a great story, because I'm a baseball fan as well. So I actually got the RBI one right. The other one not so much. But But I would like to ask both Rachel and Scott to come forward and receive their certificates, as well as their awards. So Scott?
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that.
And please join me in one last round of applause for Scott and Rachel and all the other award winners who are part of this legacy as we add 2 more this year. And so it's a wonderful opportunity for us to celebrate the accomplishments of 2 of our best faculty in the work that they do, both in teaching and scholarship. And it's what makes the university so vibrant. So thank you for that. A great day to celebrate this accomplishment, so thank you for coming out.